Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today is Thursday, September 27th, and we're going to be talking about Venus retrograde in Scorpio. Now, this is going to be a shorter talk for what I usually do. I usually talk for somewhere around an hour. We've already done a little bit on Venus retrograde in Scorpio, so I'm going to be speaking a little bit less today, and we'll probably do one more video around the time that Venus actually turns retrograde on October 6th. But here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about why it is that a variety of Venus retrograde patterns or themes tend to arise, and especially considering Venus's position in Scorpio. So the first thing that's really interesting to note about this retrograde that can kind of help you track the retrograde in your own life is to note the whole sign house, first of all, that it's moving through in your birth chart, which would be first 10 degrees of Scorpio for a long portion, maybe the last 5 degrees of Libra, 25 to 30 Libra, and the first 10 degrees of Scorpio, something like that. But you can also look at the whole sign house. So if you have a whole sign house of Scorpio in your 6th or in your 9th or whatever the case might be, you can look and think that the topics of that house will be affected by this retrograde. So that's a very good place to start an analysis for your own chart. You can always look at the whole sign house and just say, okay, that's where Venus is retrograding, Scorpio, what kinds of activities, before you even think about sign and, Venus. You could just focus on the house. So let's just give you a quick, example. First house might be health or something about identity. Second house might be finances, money, resources, time and energy that you spend on things. Third house could be siblings, neighbors, communication, the mind, very basic stuff, right? Fourth house could be your home environment. Fifth house, maybe children or pregnancy or topics surrounding creativity, joy or pleasure, even romance. Sixth house might be hard labor or service or sickness. Seventh house might be relationships or love or partnerships. Going to the eighth house, you could have partner's money or finances, or you could have things related to death or loss, impermanence, the transformative effects of facing fears and things like that. Ninth house, you could look at religion, spirituality, education, travel abroad. 10th house, career. 11th house, friends, groups, allies, organizations that you belong to, benefactors in your life. In 12th house, you got the themes of suffering and dissolution and connecting to things that are vaster than us, but also very overwhelming potentially. Okay, so just a rough spin through the 12 houses. Look again at which house Scorpio resides in, and then you can look at the topics of that house. And that's a very, very simple and basic way to prepare yourself for the retrograde that's coming. You can, if you're using a Placidus or quadrant-based house system, which a lot of people use in modern astrology, then you could quite easily, you could just look at the first 10 degrees of Scorpio, the last 5 degrees of Libra, and that gives you an idea. So, but the real reason for talking about Scorpio and the Venus retrograde in Scorpio today is to give you a sense of why this particular list of themes that's specific to Venus and specific to Scorpio are likely to take place. So Venus is in her exile in the sign of Scorpio. It's a Mars-ruled sign. Venus is also in her exile in Aries, the other Mars-ruled sign. They're both opposite to her home signs of Taurus and Libra. Now, there's an interesting thing, sometimes people don't know this, that every planet traditionally had a masculine and feminine domicile, or a yin and yang, if you want to think about it that way. And so, when we look at Venus right now, one helpful way of thinking about where she's located is that she's in the feminine home of Mars. So there's a real feminine Mars energy right to this retrograde. Even though the feminine element of the sign of Scorpio is a little bit more conducive to Venus in a sense, because Venus is more at home traditionally in Taurus than Libra. This is more at home in her feminine domicile. The elements that are more feminine, Venus is a little bit more aligned with, but it's more of a difficult place for Venus specifically because it's Mars's house. So Venus just has a hard time hanging out in Mars's house. And I've used this example many times before, but it would be like if I was, someone who really enjoyed fine art and peacefulness, in a kind of tranquil scene in nature. It would be very hard for me to be transported to a monster truck rally where, people are, listening to heavy metal or something. Like, I'm just giving a very basic stereotyped example, but so Venus hanging out in either of Mars's home signs is just challenging. And that's really at the root of why we have the specific list of challenges and themes that we do during a Venus retrograde in Scorpio. You can go back to 2010, to the last time that Venus was retrograde in Scorpio, in the autumn of 2010. Around that time is the last time you get a Venus retrograde in the sign. So if that helps you at all, along with the house location, that might be interesting. But here's the list of things that I made today in a written post that I did that you might encounter with Venus retrograde in Scorpio. And I'm just going to try to break down some of them so that you understand what's behind or what's at work within the different complexes that you could see arising. So first of all, let's say that there are value conflicts in relationships. Well, there's always value conflicts in relationships. No two people have exactly the same values, identical tastes. We're all pretty unique, right? So why would there be more of a value conflict in Scorpio than, any other Venus retrograde? And the answer for that is that Venus's usual way of dealing with conflicts of value is to seek middle ground or to build a bridge or to create harmony or accord. And so many Venus retrogrades, when Venus is starting to move backward in the sky, it could suggest a revising, revisiting, or some kind of hashing out of our values and in relationship with others, trying to reconfigure things. That's just a normal part of what happens. But one of the reasons that it's a little bit more challenging when Venus is retrograde in Scorpio is that you're trying to do so in a sign where the way of behaving is Mars-like, which is more confrontational. It's more about division as opposed to bringing things together. It's more about cutting than it is to joining, none of which are necessarily bad, but that a lot of the times when we go to work out our values and create some new configuration or new form of harmony in ourselves and others and work, wherever, we're doing so and we're leading with Venus, who's trying to make everything nice. Mars is a little bit more direct, a little bit more assertive, not afraid to cut things apart. So the value conflicts in relationships that you have right now are the sort of what I want, what you want, how are they the same, how are they different? It can be more contentious because of the Mars-ruled quality. So that just potentially extra combative quality. But here's what makes it even a little bit more difficult, is that this is Mars's feminine domicile, and which means that you have a more passive version of Mars. So Mars in Scorpio, for example, tends to be less of the fighter, the one that goes out and asserts and cuts and conquers and like that. And it tends to be more of the guardian, more of the protector, because you have a more passive yin or static quality in water signs than you do a fire sign like Aries, which is Mars's other rulership. So it can be just really tricky to figure out how to do conflicts of values in relationships, how to kind of work through that when there's this edgy Mars quality, but it's also very static, potentially very protective, guarded. So breaking down each other's walls to kind of get through and get into what we're needing and wanting, how it's different, what I desire, what you desire, are we on the same page or not? There might be a little bit more guardedness as well as a more aggressive or assertive quality. And it's just hard to work through things when the ultimate goal of Venus is, of course, harmony, right? So that's why you see the more contentious, complicated, and sometimes emotionally loaded value conflicts in relationships, if that makes sense. The other thing that's very interesting to note is that one thing that Vedic astrologers said was that the water is related to the sense of taste. And this is very interesting. Why? Because water, all the sense organs are thought to be, in a sense, neutral. So water is related to taste because water is the taste of tastelessness. And the sense organ, in a sort of mystical sense of taste, is itself tasteless. And so it's thought to be aligned with water. So there's also, in all of water signs, there's a lot of times we don't always recognize this, but there's, both with Cancer, Pisces, and Scorpio, there's a really important sense of taste, and it can be very literal, but taste is also a more psychological thing as well. Taste, as we all know, is not just how does that taste, like the apple tastes sweet or something like that, but it's also how do I bring this into myself, and how does it feel, and how do I relate to it as something that I'm kind of digesting, a digestible kind of experience, and how do I like it or not like it? And that sense of taste is intimately connected to water signs. And the other thing that can come up when Venus goes retrograde in any water sign is the way that you process the environment and information in the environment can suddenly feed back to you in a way that's very acute. So, for example, you always have to be careful of Venus retrograde in a water sign of sort of like environmental toxins and infections that are almost a little psychosomatic, or that are just a little bit more weirdly contagious. There's something about the way we're digesting and taking things in. We're bringing in something that's infectious or sort of viral, but it's through how we're digesting and absorbing experience. And that's part of that idea of taste. And so you can also go through this thing during a Venus retrograde in a water sign like Scorpio, where your tastes are changing, or they need to change because you're starting to get feedback in your body or in the environment that's saying this doesn't taste right to me. And there's really deep instinctual qualities to all the water signs, but water signs were also traditionally called mute, which means that it can be also very challenging to talk about something like taste. For example, wine connoisseurs, one of the things that they're known for is their ability to taste things in a very intricate way, but then put words to it. Right? A lot of us have an almost non-verbal sense of taste within us. It's very instinctual, especially like people like water signs, and their body language will give away kind of how they're tasting the world around them. But it's hard to put into words sometimes. And so sometimes water signs unfairly can just get called emotional and irrational. And when in some cases they actually have a really refined sense of taste that they just can't put words to. Well, all the more challenging when Venus is retrograde in a Mars-ruled sign, and water signs are mute, meaning in some ways it's harder to put words around the experiences of water, the experiences that water indicates on a sort of elemental level. So that's all why the conflicts of value in relationships can also be tricky, because taste is a hard thing to qualify with language, and what to speak of it also being a little contentious in a Mars-ruled sign and a little bit more guarded in a more passive Mars sign. Okay, so we can offend one another a little bit more easily. Our tastes can be offended a little bit more easily, and we can become a little bit more passive-aggressive or manipulative in the way that we express ourselves, express these conflicts, or try to talk through, you know, the bad taste in our mouth, so to speak. It's a little bit more challenging. You also have things like jealousy, betrayal, competition, and underhandedness in relationships. Again, it's harder for Venus to go about things directly. It's more like when someone's singing a song, you don't sing a competing note directly into their song, right? That would create dissonance. That's Mars. What you do to find harmony is you sing a note that matches, you know, kind of above or below or alongside of, however you want to think about it, the melody, right? And then you create a harmony. That's what Venus is good at doing. So you can imagine that if I'm feeling insecure, and if I'm feeling potential competitiveness with another person, whether it's a coworker or someone I am in a loving relation, like a partnership with, romance with, it becomes difficult to express. When you love the person, when you care about them, you're trying, in some ways, Venus retrograde in Scorpio, not to do a direct confrontation sometimes. And that's when the way of trying to get your needs met, or trying to get your point across, or, you know, the struggle to find harmony can come across in ways that are a little sort of twisted. You can become jealous. You can go about doing something in a way that doesn't let somebody down, or I don't want to let them down, or I don't want them to know that I'm doing something that might hurt them. I don't want to, you know, mess up the harmony, and then I do something that betrays them. Or, you know, we can be betrayed, or we can betray. We can have subtle levels of competition, you know, so like, let's say that someone's singing a song and another person comes in, and instead of harmonizing and complimenting and building up the singer of the melody, they try to take the spotlight by singing the best harmony that they can, right? It's stuff like that you have to be really careful of with this, because it's Venus trying to create harmony, but there's this aggressive edge, and it's also a little more deeply, it's held back. It's a more guarded quality as well. So you can also think about things like loss of mental or emotional stability. Why? Because mental or emotional stability in many cases has to do with the ability to harmonize with the environment around us. You know, Venus is a great part, a great symbol for how we find harmony with the world around us, which is of course critical to our mental health, our physical health. So you can see loss of mental, emotional, or physical health stability. We'll talk more about the physical health part in a bit, but you can see that loss or deterioration of those things because you start finding more dissonance. And anybody knows, like I've got a 2-month-old right now, and I find that, like, when I'm trying to get her to sleep, and it's like this shamanic trance that you're trying to, create. You're like trying to sing this song and bounce in just the perfect rhythm to get them to, like, to get the baby to, like, soothe or whatever. You become like a little bit of a magic worker with the little kids. And if something starts coming in like staccato, like just here or there, just kind of interrupting your fluidity, the child will wake up and you'll just be like, oh no, like that just took me 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Like now I got to start all over again. So similarly, just the interrupting features in the environment that interrupt the attempt to create some kind of fluidity, harmony, grace, beauty, it kind of can mess with us a little bit, and that can cause a feeling of destabilization. It's almost like a feeling of an environment destabilizing, or a musical instrument starting to go off key or something, like it needs to be tuned, like in the middle of a song or something like that. Like that can happen a little bit. On the other hand, you can see the feminine and the warrior coming together. For example, it's definitely interesting to see this Supreme Court thing that's unfolding here right now, given the themes and Bill Cosby being sentenced and things like that, where this idea of trying to advocate for something that's feminine or that's goddess oriented, or that there's the mixture of Venus and Scorpio, in other words, can be about advocacy. It can be about protecting the harmony that you want, or trying to protect or defend against things that are trying to interrupt the harmony, and needing to step up and kind of create a better space of protection, like that. So it can also work in the opposite. It's not just being interrupted or seeing health or harmony destabilized. It's also about having to assert oneself in order to protect, guard, or advocate for something that is beautiful, harmonious, etc. So you see, the feminine / feminist qualities that could be on the rise, the goddess empowered, the goddess and the warrior. Issues or challenges related to sexuality, sexual identity, one's sexual past or relationship history. Because Venus is retrograde, you can see the revisiting of old themes from the past in relationships, conflicts or conflicted patterns, Mars in a Mars ruled sign, in relationships and in the past. So, it might be time to kind of revisit some of those shadows that you think you're over, but then there's another layer, there's another layer to look at. The deterioration of a relationship, contract, friendship, or allegiance. That's not just your love relationships. It's any kind of relationship where there is some inherent sense of agreement. That agreement may fall apart. Doesn't mean that the whole relationship is going to fall apart, but there may be some need for a new level of understanding, a new accord, a new form of agreement. And it might be ready for an evolution in a relationship, where there's, version 3.0 or whatever. So secrets or unconscious material coming to the surface. Again, this is a mute water sign, Mars, protective, deep, the feminine energy of fall or of autumn that Scorpio takes place in. All the energy is drawing down deep within. And so you can also think about this retrograde period as the potential for the status quo, the veneer, to be called into question as unconscious truth surfaces and confronts us. And that's the kind of, and why? Because we sense that all is not as it seems, or that there's something that is not totally trustworthy. And that's that Mars protecting and guardianship theme. And Venus in Scorpio trots in and says like, oh, look, I'm so nice, I'm so wonderful. And in Scorpio, we're like, something's not right. You know what I mean? And so the ability to also see through the veneer, or to see through the veil, to see what's true behind the surface appearance. Also an attraction to things that are deeper, more subterranean, exotic, underworld oriented. You could see that in art. You could see that in music. You could see that in, film or whatever. So the unconscious material coming up, the confrontation with it, but also the importance of the underworld in literature, art, film, and in spiritual life. A lot of the times we like to make spiritual life look pretty rosy. Sometimes we forget that roses have thorns. That what is the song? Poison. So now you all have to go listen to Every Rose Has Its Thorn by Poison to make this day complete. That's your homework assignment. But yeah, so you can also see an ounce of truth weighed as though it's a mountain, or I put, for today's horoscope, I wrote a mountain of truth hidden as though it's an ounce. So here's the other thing, is that when things come up from the unconscious, it can trigger us, especially where we desire harmony, we desire beauty, we desire love. Something comes up that threatens, in a Mars ruled sign, from the deeps, and it threatens our sense of security, and we can make a mountain out of it, right? There could be an ounce of truth. For example, sometimes, you'll find a loved one, checking someone out. You're together in public and you'll see them and they'll be like admiring somebody. And I mean, I'm just thinking that a lot of us evolve in this way. I think when we're younger and more insecure, we see something like that and it goes like, they must be cheating on me. They must not love me. We can freak out like that. There's an ounce of truth to what we've just seen, that they have attraction to someone beyond us, but we've taken and we've made it into a mountain. On the other hand, sometimes, if you've ever been in a relationship with someone, you catch them a few times, and then they say something like, maybe they say, well, it's nothing. It's just, I can't help but think that people are beautiful, but you keep noticing it over and over and over again. Then you discover maybe a bunch of pornography on their computer or something, some bigger, darker secrets start coming up. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, I was being gaslighted. They were trying to tell me that a mountain of truth was just an ounce. Do you see what I'm saying? So it can go in either way right now. And you want to be very careful about making assumptions in either direction, and let the process of the retrograde draw you into, rather than a sort of, clandestine operation to figure out if the truth is a mountain or a molehill, if something's coming up, be patient and feel it out and be gentle, because you can really disturb relationships by things like accusations, paranoia, super jealousy, vindictiveness, like that, those kinds of things. Because you're sensing something that's true, any of us could take it too far during this period. On the other hand, the things that are coming up right now might be hints about suspicions that you've had over a long period of time, and you need to validate them and act on them. And it's hard to know the difference, right? But I think that's why letting the process play out is important, and not rushing to any kind of major changes right away. Remember that possessiveness, fear, and obsession are also complications of the Venus-Mars dynamic. When we want or desire something, we want, and we're going to go after it directly. That's Mars. When we want or desire something, but we're content to let it come to us a little bit more naturally, or to find a more easy or graceful way of entering into union with the object of our desire, that's a little bit more Venus. So Venus is retrograde in Mars's sign, which can mean that the desire to possess something, the fear of something being taken away, the obsession, like those things can really step up, and we can misinterpret all sorts of things in ourselves and in others due to not being in touch with how powerfully we're being taken over by our desires. So just paying attention to our desires. And when we have desires, the training in, whether you're talking to Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama, the yogis, or, the training is to center our minds and not let our senses take over control of all of our actions. So we can do that now. On the other hand, Venus retrograde in Scorpio for some people is going to be about a healthy release or expression of desires that maybe that they have kept pent up. So repression, and then sometimes some kind of overcompensation, like you got to go, some people go a little bit wild trying to get in touch with their desires in a healthier way. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that, you can't renounce things and then still just sit in your head thinking and desiring about them all day long. That's not a real form of renunciation. Well, a lot of people do that. A lot of people say, I know it's not good to want X, Y, or Z, but all I do is sit and think about it. So a lot of the times our spiritual progress with learning to control the senses or learning to relate to them in a positive way is incremental. We can't throw everything out, because then we'll rebound in the opposite direction really extremely. So, having a healthy relationship with our desires, trying to make progress on them without, shunning them in a way that only amplifies them or makes their voice louder, that's part of this as well. Reaping what's been sown in relationships. Retrograde periods are just karmic fruiting periods for relationships of all kinds, or agreements of all kinds. And then making external changes to appearance, to style, to wardrobe, to behavior. Venus retrograde likes to do that a lot. Can be a little bit more conflicted with Scorpio, sometimes a little bit more toward the side of wanting to make a big confrontational change, like, more dramatic changes, sometimes a little bit darker or edgier changes that we want to make. Just remember, Venus's name was phosphorus. I talked about this previously, or self-illumined. And while Venus is adorned externally as a goddess with jewels and fragrances and flowers and all sorts of external material things. The real beauty of the goddess is the self-illumination. So the goddess is truly not possessed by anyone. The goddess doesn't belong to anyone, right? And and that's what makes Venus worthy of adoration and adornment. We just like us, when we are illumined by good qualities in the world, people naturally want to give us things, want to say nice things to us, want to do good things for us. The adornment, the worship, the adoration, all of that comes in a sense naturally when we're in touch with our self-illumined nature. This is why all the saints have halos around their heads, that self-illumined quality. But Venus isn't interested in the flowers and the fruits, and that's not what Venus is. And so similarly, during a Venus retrograde, sometimes we feel that something essential is lacking. We're not in touch with that self-illumined part of ourselves, and so we try to make changes to all the external stuff. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes you got to redo your website, you got to redo your wardrobe, you got to redo your style of your house, you got to try on a new way of doing art, whatever. That's fine. It's all part of the Venus retrograde process, you could say. But if it's not part of also trying to get back in touch with that self-illumined nature, then, a lot of the times the changes I said today are a bit like dressing up a dead body to pretend it's alive again. We can try to cover the dissatisfaction that we have in life with all sorts of external superficial changes, hoping that that's what'll bring us to life. But the self-illumined being that we are, it's being in touch with it is self-satisfying. And, then a lot of the times the external changes come naturally, and they're usually a lot simpler, a lot less dramatic, or a lot less need to make a statement. So my prayer today was, be our personal makeover over and over and over again. That's what I've got for you guys today, and I hope that you guys have a great weekend. I will be in touch very soon with the astrology of October and my monthly sun sign horoscopes, and we'll be looking at a whole bunch of transits in the first 10 days of October especially. So, all right, take care, everybody. Have a good one.